How's your sleep pattern at this point? How's your?
It's pretty normal.
I mean, you're older than I am. How do you handle staying up for what was it, 30 hours or something like that?
26 hours was how long the stream was.
Jeez.
I have a kid, so my sleep patterns have been destroyed for like 7 years now, and I'm fine.
Oh, okay, sure.
My strategy is get up right before the stream starts, go until the stream is over, take like a 2 to 4 hour nap at most, just enough that I'm functional, and then try desperately to stay awake until like 10 o'clock the next night so I can go to sleep and have a normal sleep schedule.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, it worked.
Do you have a midstream kind of revitalization strategy? Like I would when I was doing the 24 at home, I had like a 2 a.m. kind of combo, stand outside for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And like look at the moon and breathe in the cold night air, and then take like a fast, like 2-minute cold lukewarm shower, and then make a pot of coffee. Like that was I'm going to get through the rest of this by doing these 3 things.
That's a good one. So let's see. Usually I ate a bunch of junk food, which is bad.
Yeah.
This time every time I got up, I did some jumping jacks or like jogged in place for a few minutes.
Yeah.
I had to go out and leave the house like 5 hours in for a soccer game.
Oh, right.
Which was awesome.
Yeah. Get you,
because I realized that the world's still out there.
Absorb some daylight, some blue wavelength.
Yeah, vitamin D load. And then like instead of eating garbage, I got some cut fruit from the grocery store and ate like some cut pineapple and watermelon and stuff like that. I had some salami and cheese when I wanted a little protein bump. And then I had a giant cheese pizza that I kind of munched on the whole time.
Ooh, wow. Huh. That's a real turn.
And no Red Bull.
Yeah, wow.
I skipped the Red Bull entirely.
Okay.
Yeah, I just did cold brew coffee this year.
Yeah, these lunatics at work, every time we stream there for this thing, they just want to do like pizza and booze, and I just can't comprehend why you would do that to yourself. Like I was always like, I would stock the fridge with like yogurt and like kale salad and beef jerky and just real light like energy food. And that would get me through. But, it's different strokes.
I like a scrambled egg. Scrambled egg in there is good. Because you can eat that and then you don't have to go to the bathroom afterwards. So that's nice.
Just a protein blast.
Yeah. But, it's all for the kids, Brad.
For the kids.
Hashtag beat Dave Lang.
Was that a real hashtag?
We were trying. I mean, the goal is always to beat Dave Lang, no matter what.
In any and all things.
Yeah, I mean, look, we were the grassroots Bernie campaign to Dave Lang's Hillary juggernaut, and he had all of his big money game industry friends, whereas we had 700 small time donors.
He's always feasting, leaving no table scraps for the rest of us.
Yeah, no, it's not okay. It's not okay. Welcome to Brad and Will Make a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
Hello. Hi, I'm Brad.
Hello.
It's Tech.
Hi. How's it going, Brad?
It's tech time in Tech Town.
I'm not wearing sweatpants today, but I am wearing pajama bottoms.
Nice.
So I feel like it's basically the same thing.
Got some good gym shorts going on over here. I didn't do my hair. I never do my hair for this podcast. That's a little behind the scenes secret that people can get on. You feel like you're on the inside.
I see natural Brad Shoemaker hair, which I haven't seen in 5 years, I think, at this point.
Really don't want to see what my hair looks like without anything in it.
Mine is very floppy, it turns out.
Yep. Bedhead Tech.
Yeah, there we go. That's the name of our follow-up podcast. That's the after show.
We'll come up with a new name for this podcast every week.
What do you think about new names for Wi-Fi, Brad?
Yeah, that's kind of my first question about today's topic, which is Wi-Fi 6.
Yes.
Is it just the sequel to 802.11 AC?
So yes, it is the 6th generation of Wi-Fi if you begin counting with B, I believe.
So in other words, the consortium, the
Wi-Fi Alliance, yeah.
The steering committee for Wi-Fi realized that 802.11 AC is not a good example of a marketable name for their technology.
It turns out that, yeah, it's a little confusing for the normal consumers, especially when you realize that Wi-Fi 6 would be called AX, I believe.
Yeah, oh, wow, that's kind of worse because you've already got an A in the previous one.
Well, but the X is cool. The X is the coolest number, coolest letter, right?
X does sound very edgy and futuristic for sure. But okay, so hang on.
Name them all.
There's B, G, N, and AC, which I assume are 2 through 5. What was the first one? Was there just 802.11?
B is the first one. B is Wi-Fi 1. A, which everybody forgets, the 5.4 gigahertz version of what became G. So B came out in like 2003 or something, 2000, somewhere around in there, right? A was developed simultaneously, but the chipsets lagged because it operated in the 5 gigahertz spectrum.
Okay.
So it had a faster theoretical maximum because there's more bandwidth in the higher spectrum. They had manufacturing difficulties and actually ended up coming out after B for all intents and purposes, and had really, really low adoption.
So A just kind of never caught on.
I mean, it was used in like embedded systems and stuff like that. The Sonos, I think, the early Sonos speakers used A because it was uncontested. One of the benefits of using A instead of B was that if you had 2.4 gigahertz interference, which was a big problem with B, if you can think back, you might not have had Wi-Fi back then, but when B was new, you'd turn on your microwave oven, which also operates at the 2.4 gigahertz range, and it would crap out everybody's Wi-Fi in the neighborhood.
Wait a minute, I was under the impression that the Faraday cage in the microwave was protecting me from any emissions from that thing.
Well, it is, but the coil that makes the thing is a massive radio generator. So the microwaves are blasting into the oven. The EM is coming out the other end of that.
Oh, well, that would make sense. Yeah, of course, because microwaves and radio waves wouldn't interact with each other, right?
I mean, it's all just light at the end of the day.
But different shapes of light.
Exactly. So
like A came out after B, but before G, is that right?
A came out after B, but before G.
But then G is also a 2.4 gigahertz, right?
So G basically takes the stuff that they did in B and puts it on the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. So they did the stuff that they did to get 54 megabits per second theoretical with A. They moved over to G. So it has like wider channels. So I think B was 10 megahertz channels. So that's like how wide the frequency band was that each channel used. G moved them to 20 megahertz, which doubles the speed immediately. And then they also used the signal modulation from A that gave them the higher speed there. And that helped reduce interference. So it was a little bit more usable. And like your cordless phones wouldn't knock. Remember cordless phones? That was a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. They wouldn't knock the Wi-Fi off either.
So it was B, then A, then G, then N, then AC, and now 6.
Yes. So B is 1, A is 2, G is 3, N is 4, AC is 5, and AX is 6.
This is a hard change to make midstream, I feel like, because as clunky as 802.11 blank is to say, like that's kind of what I've gotten used to. So
my third day at Maximum PC, the Wi-Fi Alliance showed up and was like, hey, we would like to talk to you about this thing that we're doing. Because up until that point, all of the nascent Wi-Fi, like wireless networking stuff, you had to buy within one hardware brand.
I can't believe you've met agents of the Wi-Fi Alliance.
Oh, I met them multiple times over the years. They were very, very available.
Are they wearing like trench coats and sunglasses and slick back hair and like an earpiece?
They were like normal suit-wearing early 2000s PR types.
Okay.
They were very affable.
All right.
They may have been Canadian.
Okay, they're not Men in Black or anything.
No. They didn't try to flashy. I don't remember them flashy thinking me. Maybe they did. Who knows? Like we asked. I specifically was like, hey, do you think that this 802.11 stuff is a good branding thing for this? Do you think people are going to understand this? And they're like, oh yeah, sure. It's going to be so ubiquitous that they understand it. They'll have no choice but to understand. I was like, I don't know if that's how this works.
Consortiums have a sterling record of making accurate predictions about what people will be able to understand and keep track of.
I mean, it worked out so far, and the generations are pretty long. So it's like a 4 or 5 year generation on average for each one. So like it's not, and kind of it doesn't matter after you got past G. It kind of doesn't matter whether you have an N, AC, AX, whatever, unless you're doing something weird like using a Steam Link to stream inside your house, stream video games inside your house, or something that requires actual performance.
Or if you have all of your bulk storage on the network and need to move things around that way.
Fair.
Let's say I was backing up all of my girlfriend's pictures from iCloud to my NAS the other day and thinking, man, if I had faster Wi-Fi, all these gigabytes of pictures would be copying a lot faster than they are.
Is it copying from her? Why don't you plug the laptop in?
Well, I could have, but oh God, Lucy Ethernet cables just hanging around all over the place, man. That's unsightly.
Wow.
That's crass.
You got to get a dangler, man. You got to have one just hanging out of the router that you can just plug it whatever you need to and get your business in the port.
I mean, I don't have good access to my router and switch and stuff like that. I love hidden electronics. I've got that stuff all mounted behind my desk, so I have to lay down on my back on the floor and crawl under my desk to plug in an Ethernet cable because I like not seeing things.
Brad,
it's you know what?
You like not seeing things, and I mean that explains the monitors. Then this all comes around.
I'm very particular. Anyway, yeah, Wi-Fi, it's fast. In the home, it's fine for the most part. I don't know. Certainly stuff that you could complain about, but it's pretty good.
I was going to say N was a real turning point. This was probably the last time I talked to the Wi-Fi Alliance people, for what it's worth. But like you went from 54 megabits per second throughput to 600 megabits per second throughput
on N
with the jump from G to N. Yeah,
I thought it was
depending on antenna configuration.
Okay, I was going to because I've traditionally always understood N to top out at 300, and I would rarely even connect at that. But maybe that's being on a cheap consumer router. I don't know.
It depends on how many antennas. It literally is dependent on how many antennas you have, because N used a technology called MIMO, which is multiple in, multiple out. Multiple inputs, multiple outputs, and basically what it does is use multiple antennas to create multiple kind of radio pipes through the environment. So it would look around and it would find reflections, like metal that causes reflections and things like that. And each of those reflections, it could create a different pipeline from the router to the endpoint and back. And so if you had two antennas on that router, then you would get double the throughput to a single device, assuming the other end also had two antennas.
Do I understand correctly that Wi-Fi is inherently asynchronous unless you employ workarounds like that? Is that correct? Like on a single channel or a single antenna or whatever, like you're not able to send and receive at the same time, right?
I think it depends. That's a good question. I don't know that, actually.
This is where, it's easy to look at like, okay, N is equivalent to this throughput, AC does this. But when you get into like channel width and number of bonded channels and number of antennas and all that stuff, that's where I feel like even for somebody who's fairly technically minded, it can get really kind of lost in the weeds, understanding what your capabilities actually are.
Well, one of the things that's a problem with this is that the throughput is shared for every device that's connected to the router at whatever spec you're using. So like AC and N routers will step down and like use one of the radios in an N router as a G radio if it has to, if there's G devices connected. So that will bring down the overall throughput on your entire network if you plug in one, say, Nintendo DS Lite.
Interesting. Okay.
It'll bring down everything else that's on that node, and you won't have that second antenna available for the end stuff until you get to later hardware, which can actually time slice the radio, and that has a performance impact as well. But it's less than just turning it all the way down.
Like that seems unavoidable right now because like we're still, I think we've probably bought devices in the last year that still use G, and that's just kind of the nature of things, right?
Wow. Oh man, I haven't had G. I think my routers have been set to AC and N backwards compatibility for a couple of years, and I haven't had any problems.
Well, like any like high end computing oriented device is probably going to be at least N, if not AC, at this point. But I'm talking stuff like little home automation enabled light strip that I got a few months ago, and like we've got it's not a Roomba, but we've got a Dbot
robot vacuum,
knockoff robot vacuum, and I'm trying to think. I mean, we've got a couple smart plugs, and I think those are all G still, and there's just not a lot unless you're buying super high end everything. Like I feel like you're still kind of stuck with that.
Well, so one of the things you can do is set the router to time slice, so you're not using the full amount of the antenna's time to serve your old hardware. The interesting side effect of having multiple antennas in the devices is that things like repeaters and those types of devices went from trying to time slice one radio to having 3 or 4 radios in the device, so that your mesh networks and stuff like that actually work really well now versus in the G and even early N days when they did not work at all.
And the idea behind a mesh network is essentially just seamless handoff as you move around. Is that right? Like you're always connected to the same SSID and just not worrying about physically where you are in the kind of coverage map.
That's definitely one of the benefits. But the main thing is that having multiple radios lets the router and the other mesh network endpoints dedicate a radio to talking either upstream or downstream. So, for example, you have a router that's plugged into your cable modem. That router has that device has multiple radios, and it will pipe one to the mesh network that's only plugged into power in your bedroom. And then there's a radio that those radios can jump around and they pass the signal without having to have there's downtime when a radio connects. So like, when you turn on your phone at the house and it connects to Wi-Fi, when you get home and it takes a second or two for it to log in and grab an IP address and all that stuff. If the mesh networks have to do that every time they're passing a signal back and forth, it adds a massive amount of latency, which doesn't slow down the throughput at all, really. It does a little bit, but it makes it feel really slow. So having the dedicated radios to keep those connections live all the time makes a big difference.
I assume it's not one radio, one device, right? Like a radio has to be up or down. It can't be both, but whichever mode it's in, it can be talking to multiple clients at the same time, right?
Probably. It depends on the implementation, I'm sure.
But like it's incredibly complicated.
Well, this is why it took 15, 18, 17 years before we started seeing good mesh network implementations for Wi-Fi. I mean, people were selling Wi-Fi range extenders from like 2004. It was the second thing that they probably made for 802.11b, but they were always bad, or they required you to run an Ethernet cable to the range extender.
Okay, so just to be clear, because I don't have any hands-on experience with mesh networks, I've just got a single standalone access point. But that is the biggest advantage, right? Is there are no cables, there are no Ethernet cables involved with the whatever you want to call them, the repeaters or the kind of the nodes around the network. Like, do they just plug into power and that's it?
Well, and yeah, in most cases, like the Google case, which is the one I've spent the most time with, my parents have at their place, like their house is old, so it's not particularly big, but it's old, and the construction means that the Wi-Fi doesn't go through the walls very well. So they have to have multiple access points on multiple floors, and each access point is like a bubble of Wi-Fi. What they did was buy a bunch of Google Homes, and as long as you put them close enough that they have good signal between each other, you really can't tell that they're not wired in when they're on AC. And that also has the added benefit of letting them do things like put one in the barn outside, so there's a Wi-Fi hotspot around the barn.
Wi-Fi in the barn.
Well, when you live out in the country and don't have cell service, it turns out barn Wi-Fi is really good.
Yeah, I guess so. Just gonna, go lay up in the hayloft with my iPad and just kind of catch up on the news.
Look, when you're working on the tractor, you want to have Spotify. That's all I'm saying.
That's fair. I guess that makes sense. So are most mesh networks modular in that you can, it sounds like, I mean, you mentioned this with the Google stuff already. Like, can you just add nodes at will, or do you hit a maximum?
I'm sure there's a theoretical maximum when you get far enough in. But yeah, with the Google ones, like you buy a 3-pack and that covers most houses. And all of the units are the same. It's not like you have to buy a router and then buy a different access point.
Oh,
for those, you just plug them in and then they configure as either access points, mesh nodes, wireless mesh nodes, wired mesh nodes, or the router, depending on where they are in the topology of the network.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I was envisioning like some kind of master control node that then spooled out to a bunch of like repeaters or something. But that sounds more elegant.
It seems like with the Orbi and the Google stuff that they're smart enough to just know. And the cost of putting the router, this is another weird thing that's happened because the cost of those ARM chips that drive these devices has gotten really inexpensive. But it's no more cost for that. It's probably more expensive for them to make 2 different products than it is just make the one product that has the maximum capabilities across the board.
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. Yeah, that's another one of the cases of just this like massive, efficient compute power making everything better.
Yeah. So let's see. I think we've talked about A, B, G, and N.
I was just going to mention real fast. I mean, we touched on some of this stuff a little bit in that internet/networking episode we did a few weeks ago.
And
I was talking about how, remember how I said I couldn't remember, like I could remember pre-Wi-Fi and post-Wi-Fi, but not that transition.
Yeah.
Not that inflection point.
Yeah.
I think it was the Nintendo DS, actually.
Wow.
Like, I think that was I think the first DS, which was a B device that could only support WEP security, which just sounds like Stone Age technology at this point.
Pure Nintendo-ass Nintendo right there.
Yeah. But I mean, that was like 2004. So like that, there were no smartphones then. Like you didn't have much of a need for Wi-Fi at that point. And I'm pretty sure the DS was my first exposure to the very concept of Wi-Fi.
So I was reviewing laptops and stuff at Maximum PC, and I was the networking guy. So I had all of the Wi-Fis early on.
Yeah. So I'm sure you had a much greater like professional need for that stuff, but like thinking back on it, especially like covering games professionally back then, like I think my feeling was just like, oh, work has Wi-Fi and I will download the DS games while I'm there. Or no, we weren't even downloading games.
You were
then,
getting
actually.
cartridges.
We were still getting cartridges, but whatever you needed to do on the Wi-Fi, it was just like, oh, I'll do it when I'm in the office, and then who cares once I get home.
Did you? So I remember the first time when I was writing for Ars still and lived in Tennessee, I had gotten a wireless kit, and I was able to sit on the couch with the wireless kit and look stuff up on the internet very, very slowly while I was writing articles, which was incredible. Like that was a magical moment.
Just like the moment of getting information to a device without anything tethered to it.
Yeah, but
for the first time.
Well, but then I didn't have another laptop for probably 5 years. Like I didn't get a laptop. I didn't have a work issued laptop at Maximum PC until 2005 or 2006 when they gave me a MacBook for so I could look at proofs on my computer instead of bothering one of the designers.
One more little piece of old man reminiscing about this stuff before we get into the hot news tech. Also, this is dangerously far afield of Wi-Fi because it's not actually Wi-Fi, but it's still fun to mention. Did you have any exposure to like EVDO stuff back around that time?
Oh,
because I had a company issued laptop with a PCMCIA slot on it, and an EVDO card which connected to whatever the contemporary cell data network was. Was that Edge?
GPRS probably. It was pre-Edge.
Really?
Yeah, it was probably.
So it would have been like 0304.
That was probably the 2G GPRS stuff. Yeah,
I thought Edge was 2G.
Edge was not right. Like Edge was like
was Edge after.
It was like midway between, as I recall. I can't remember.
Oh, was that like 2G plus or something? But I would sit there. Distinctly remember sitting at a Microsoft press conference at E3 in like 04 with this giant laptop with this huge card sticking out of the side, loading our CMS at probably bytes per second and trying to like live blog what was being announced by typing into a field in this thing over this garbage ass cell card.
So I did that once at QuakeCon. But I think the time the Gizmodo and Engadget folks kind of independently and simultaneously invented the live blog. If you remember back when like the iPhone was new, when iPhone keynotes would drive 3 months worth of traffic in like 5 minutes to a tech blog. And my friend Brian, who was a former intern and was the editor of Gizmodo, had done one, but he was like, I want to have pictures for this. And I was credentialed for the Gizmodo keynote. For the Apple keynote as well. And he was like, hey, if we share this, can you take pictures while I do the live blog? So the first time we had pictures dumping into the feed for the live blog, I was sitting there shooting with a Canon D20 and we were uploading over one of those hotspots that was probably a 3G hotspot. It was probably one of the brand new 3G hotspots. And like it was challenging because we needed something that was tethered to the laptop, like that you could plug in with the USB to the laptop. But if the pictures were too big, they just wouldn't upload. They'd fail. So we had to set the camera as low as it would go. And then I was only allowed to take one picture every like 2 minutes or 3 minutes, or else we'd overload the connection. It was a weird time.
Yeah, it was.
Those things were neat, but they weren't great. And they were almost always better than the event Wi-Fi. That was the secret.
Yes, absolutely. That stuff would just get completely slammed and become utterly useless. That honestly, like, I mean, this is, I swear, let's get back to on topic. I'll stop digressing after this, but like that was maybe the most rewarding or some of the most rewarding work I've done in that field because you were doing so much with so little. Like you really had to get creative to come up with solutions to problems that hadn't really been addressed yet. You know, like there was a time when probably before those EVDO cards became really available, or maybe around the same time, like we would have somebody with a phone that had an AIM client on it, something like a T-Mobile Sidekick at the press conference.
Yeah.
Literally aiming the news to somebody back in a workroom somewhere writing up the actual stories because, you know, nothing was live streamed back then.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing was getting out of those press conferences. Like literally we were getting like 20 to 30 minutes up on the competition by having somebody IM that stuff as opposed to like running out and writing it up after the thing.
Well, and like getting to figure that stuff out was so fun.
Yeah, it
was like, here are the tools that we have available to us. How can we assemble these in a way that's going to give us an edge over the other people doing the exact same thing?
It's always been more fun to solve problems with very like primitive and limited tools than it has been to really be flush with solutions and just kind of have everything work.
Well, and like in the old days, it was just hard. Like everything was limited. Wi-Fi. I think the first time I went to a CES keynote with a Wi-Fi laptop, it worked. And then the next year, too many people had them because at the time you could only put like 256 people on a node or something like that. And there were 3,000 people in the theater and they had probably 4 nodes. So basically you could connect and then it would just stall out for the next hour. And you know, when Bill Gates was doing his talk, you would get a third of that uploaded. So it was, yeah.
Mainstream adoption ruins everything.
Yeah. It was all better when it was just a bunch of nerds on the internet.
Speaking of mainstream adoption.
Yeah.
Wi-Fi.
AC. So prior to N, there was a question over whether Wi-Fi would ever be good enough to replace like wired networks. And there was other stuff. There was like power line networks. There were networks that operated over the cable coax in your house. And that stuff mostly has gone away for consumers. You can still buy power line stuff. It turns out the cable stuff is mostly used in like set-top boxes now by AT&T and Comcast and things like that to share, like to pipe video around your house if you have multiple cable boxes. But AC took off and expanded the width of the channels between 80 to 160 megahertz. It gave way more antennas than were available to the 802.11n spec. And they standardized beamforming, which was like an optional thing in N, and turns out makes a big deal in how performance works.
Beamforming has always sounded like the most futuristic high tech shit to me.
It is. The math is terrifying, but the basic gist is that if you have two antennas and you time the signals right, then you can kind of direct which way the fat part of the signal goes. And that's pretty much it. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the actual concept is pretty straightforward. It's just it sounds like something out of like some kind of old sci-fi serial or something.
Well, so it yeah, definitely. It's Mr. Shoemaker, I am the beamformers at the Klingon ship, and yeah, here we go. 802.11ac is notable for a couple of reasons. One is that throughput got really complicated because the cost of the radios went down enough that even cheap routers have multiple antennas now, so you get the full benefit of the spec. A lot of vendors will say like 802.11ac 1500, which that 1500 is the theoretical throughput in megabits per second across all the antennas. So and both frequency ranges. So the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands.
Okay, so you're never going to have a single client connect at that speed.
Yeah, because you generally the clients either connect to the 2.4 gigahertz range, which is going to be slower but have better penetration through walls and stuff like that, or you'll connect to the 5.4 gigahertz band, which has higher throughput and maybe less competition, but doesn't penetrate walls and things like that as well. Generally speaking, higher frequencies penetrate less well than lower frequencies. So yeah, the other thing is there are two generations of AC. So wave 1 was the initial wave. Wave 2 came out midway through 2016 and increased the theoretical throughput from 1.3 gigabits per second to 2.34 gigabits per second, and also allowed for a lot more connected devices. So that became important. It was it's something we should note. Theoretical throughputs on Wi-Fi are usually, like when you're doing a wired network, you assume that the actual throughput is about 80% of the theoretical throughput. So if you're talking about gigabit Ethernet, you're going to get, it's 1,000 megabits per second theoretical, and you'll get like 800 megabits to 900 megabits actual performance, because there's network overhead for like drop packets and, lost data and stuff like that. Error correction. With Wi-Fi, you need a lot more error correction. So the theoretical throughputs and the actual throughputs are sometimes as low as half, which is to be expected. Like things are working properly. But the neat thing about Wave 2 is that 2.34 gigabits per second theoretical throughput, even if you're only working at half efficiency, you're going to get faster than gigabit if you have the right number of antennas on both ends.
This might be a level of minutia that most people don't care about. But does that overhead manifest at the stated speed that you are connecting to the access point, or is that the actual, like, the real world throughput within the connection? You know what I mean? Like, or to put it in more practical terms, like, you can hold Option and click the little Wi-Fi icon on a MacBook and see the actual speed you're connected at.
That speed, I think, is the actual throughput that you're getting.
So whatever number you see there, you can expect that you're actually going to more or less saturate that.
Well, so there's two places that error correction happen. One is on the physical layer of the network, which is like the network card handles before it sees the driver in Windows or OS 10 or whatever your OS is. So the network card does a certain amount of error correction as it goes. Inside that up a level from, like, if you think about network, and I'm going to mess this up, so please scream at your radio.
Proceed.
But yeah, if you think about like a coax cable with multiple layers inside, and there's the outer insulation, and then there's some like braided wire, and then there's a thick layer of insulation, and then there's a little tiny copper wire that runs right through the middle of the whole thing that's solid. The outer layer is the network infrastructure, and that handles things like keeping the water out and like big it makes sure that it knows where to connect. It has a MAC address and says, here, this is me, raises his hand, this is me, and here's how to get to me. And then you go up a couple of layers and you get to the IP layer. There's also error correction at the IP layer. So your actual MAC connected throughput will still be a theoretical on that, and like the efficiency of the UDP or TCP protocols will take a little bit of bandwidth as well. So
bottlenecks all the way down.
Yeah, you get slices off every time you get to a new layer, basically. The last interesting thing about AC is it reaches the Shannon limit. We talked about this yesterday, but the Shannon limit is the theoretical. The Shannon limit is the degree of noise contamination of a communications channel determines the maximum theoretical data rate of that channel. And AC is efficient to the point that it approaches the Shannon limit very closely.
So it has physically maximized its own throughput?
Yeah, for the channel widths, 80 to 6100 megahertz channels, you can always add wider channels or add more channels. But yeah.
So real quick before we move on from AC, and if I had maybe stuck with consumer Wi-Fi hardware, I would not be asking this question, but since I bought that Ubiquiti access point, I'm in IT land, and I'm sitting here looking at the interface, and you can set channel widths for both the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz radios. Is there any reason not to max those? Like, I've fiddled around with that stuff, and like, for instance, I found that my clients on the 5G or the 5 gigahertz were connecting at higher speeds. Basically, the options there are 20, 40, and 80, and I was getting better connection speeds at 40 than I was at 80, and I maybe there are best practices out there for stuff like that I should just go read up on, but that seems a little counterintuitive.
So there's two reasons. One is if the clients that you're connecting don't support the wider channels.
Okay.
Then there's no reason to turn on the wider channels.
And could that actually lead to slower speeds, potentially?
It shouldn't lead to slower speeds, but
just be equivalent because it's a fallback?
Yeah, it'll just not use the top half of that channel. It's basically you wasting that spectrum. The other thing is you live in a really congested area because you're in a dense residential area, and like
it's terrible.
It's like when I opened my phone to connect to your Wi-Fi, I think there were 200 APs or something in range.
Yeah, so I can do a side scan off this access point, and it maxes out the list of visible, like it literally picks up like over 100 2.4 gigahertz networks.
Generally speaking, the AC stuff and both are much better at dealing with other Wi-Fi interference. I like in my neighborhood, which is a dense suburban neighborhood, not a dense urban neighborhood. I see 40 APs, probably 30 APs, probably. I don't have any problem. I can run the full 80 megahertz channels. With where you are, it may be that you're having interference with other people who have similar networks.
So it's basically just a trial and error thing. Just try different settings and see what works.
It's kind of like placing the router, right? Like if you have the option of moving the router around or moving the mesh network endpoints around, the way you find out if you have the mesh network is in a good spot is by plugging it in, going to the far extent of its range, testing your throughput, and then moving it like 10 feet to the right or left and seeing if there's a better spot. Usually, most places you don't have to do that, but if you want to like min-max your coverage, then you may. For example, when my father did his, in order to get the pole that the router that covers the barn is covered, he had to move his upstairs mesh endpoint closer to a window. Basically, is it?
Yeah. All that min-maxing and trial and error is why I ended up just running Ethernet cable across the house transparently, because anything that I really care about in terms of download speeds and latency, I just want to be on a wire.
Well, and this is why when you record a podcast with Zencaster, it says, "Hey, are you on a wired Ethernet connection?" Because the latency is better. Same thing for games. Like you add 5 or 10 milliseconds of latency just by being on Wi-Fi with AC and NG.
That's why I don't consider Wi-Fi a viable option for consoles. Because
it's fine if you're just downloading games and playing single player stuff. But if you're
downloads fine. Yeah.
And just to be clear, most of very relatively few people in the United States have internet connections that are faster than AC.
Yeah. Well, I am also in that tiny slice of the population.
Yeah.
So yeah, that does matter for me. But anyway.
So Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi. Oh wait. There's one more.
Uh-oh. There's
one in between. There's a tweensy. Have you heard of WiGig?
I think I've heard that name, and it sounded so ridiculous that I just blocked it out.
So it is 802.11 AD and AY, more extensions of the IEEE 802.11 spec. This operates in 2 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and 60 gigahertz bands. 60.
What? Is that? That sounds like an illegal number of gigahertz.
It's a lot of gigahertz.
I mean, like quite literally illegal considering the spectrum is regulated, but I don't know.
So there's another unregulated area above 60 gigahertz that is basically millimeter wave. WiGig gives you speeds of up to 7 gigabits per second.
Wow.
It's mostly used for for sending uncompressed video wirelessly.
Jeez.
So, for example, I have a Vive wireless kit that you plug into a Vive or a Vive Pro, and it uses a battery pack with a VR headset, and it has enough bandwidth at 7 gigabits per second to pipe uncompressed, native resolution video or very lightly compressed native resolution video per eye to the VR headset from the computer
with an acceptable amount of latency.
Yeah, you don't even notice. Next time you come over, you should try it.
Jeez, that's wild.
It's the problem is I have an antenna that hangs on the top of my monitor and it has to have line of sight.
That was my question.
Yeah, so like if you try to put it on the other side of a wall or something like that, it just doesn't work. Yeah, it's mostly for uncompressed video transport. It requires a dedicated card. I don't think it's built into any motherboards. I would describe it as mostly moribund at this point.
And I'm guessing Wi-Fi 6 will make it 100% so.
Pretty much, it seems like. It seems like the Y gig was maybe Intel trying to get out in front of the next generation of Wi-Fi and take it as their own, and then just nobody cared.
That never seems like a good idea to me. Like, you see it all the time with, like, I feel like G-Sync is an example, and the current NVIDIA ray tracing RTX stuff is looks like it's maybe going down a similar path. And like, here's another example of like single corporations, usually the dominant ones, trying to like muscle their way in and take control or create a standard when nobody else has agreed to it. And it just seems like it never actually catches on.
Like, G-Sync has been pretty successful, I think, in the niche that it lives in.
Oh yeah, and we've talked about this before. Like, it obviously it proved its worth. I mean, like, technically it is very impressive and does what it's supposed to. It's just that like FreeSync seems to be the open standard, unsurprisingly, seems to be the thing that is actually really making its way into the widest number of products.
I mean, the RTX thing is in it. We should talk. We'll do an episode about ray tracing at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
But part of that, I think NVIDIA's strategy with that stuff, because they are famous for doing this with PhysX and G-Sync and now RTX and like hardware transform and lighting extensions way back in the old days,
pixel shaders, all that stuff.
Yeah, their thing is the standards committees move really slowly, and often like they just want to get something out in market because they want to sell video cards. So
that makes sense.
And they have a good developer relations team, so they can actually get people to use CUDA or get people to use RTX or whatever it is. Usually, I think by writing marketing checks, but that's fine. That's how the business works, I guess.
The open standards do seem to move like remarkably slowly. Like, I was just reading about PCI Express this morning, and apparently the standard for PCI Express 5 was ratified before PCI Express 4 hardware, before there were CPUs on the market that supported 4.
Well, but that's because the pipeline on CPUs is so deep. Right.
Well, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, you're looking at like 3 years from the initial design to first tape out, probably.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe the new Wi-Fi standards will come online in consumer products a lot faster than that.
And like, it's important. Like, the thing that's important about Wi-Fi to note is that literally when they came and talked to us in early 2000s about why Wi-Fi Alliance was important, their pitch was, we're not going to make this faster or better or anything like that. We're just going to make it so that if the box has this sticker on it, it will work with other devices that have this sticker on it. That was their whole, like, it was all interoperability testing, and like the IEEE drove the spec forward, but the Wi-Fi Alliance, the people that changed it from 802.11 whatever to Wi-Fi 6, we're saying, hey, we just want to make sure everything works together. So like, you're talking about minimum viable versus, then this is a market where there's 30 different vendors making products, or hundreds of vendors making products if you count all the endpoints, versus video cards where there's 2 companies, maybe 3 if you count Intel, making video cards. And I would feel weird about, say, Broadcom determining wide swaths of this spec and saying that stuff's only going to work on their hardware, which is 20% of the market or whatever. And whereas NVIDIA, with half of the market, or probably more than half in the high end space, it's a different situation.
Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, Wi-Fi 6. This is the big business. 45 minutes in, we're nailing it.
All right, lay it on me. I'm ready. It's been a long time. I'm ready to get excited about Wi-Fi again.
This is it's 802.11ax. Wi-Fi Alliance decided to retroactively rename every generation previously based on this 6th generation Wi-Fi, and the speeds are up to 9.6 gigabits per second.
Wow. Okay. Now
that's using the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band plus some newly available area that ranges between 1 and 6 gigahertz. Basically,
was that spectrum used for anything else previously, and has it been freed up?
I think it's old phone spectrum, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
The upshot is it's going to be 4 times faster in areas where AC had dense deployments that were interfering with each other. So for you might see a significant speed improvement. For me, probably not, because we were already at the Shannon limit, and it seems like they're not necessarily increasing the width of the bands. for 802.11ax.
All the spectrum stuff is hard to get your head around, but that extra gigahertz of spectrum, the up in the 6 gigahertz range, like is there anything inherently about that range of the spectrum that is less interactive with itself than the lower part of the range, or is it just that fewer people will be using it and that's why it won't be as interfered with?
Because it's new, there will be fewer people using it.
Well, that goes without saying, I guess, but what I mean is, like, once that part of the spectrum becomes saturated or widely used, is it not going to have the same issues with interference as everything else?
No, they're just they're doing more stuff that makes it work better in all spectrums. So even if you have a router that's only a 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz router, you'll still be fine. And part of it is also, remember, this stuff has to work around the whole world. So you're looking at there may be stuff that's not licensed for public use here that is in Japan or South Korea or Europe or wherever. So
looking at your notes here, another peek behind the curtain. This says speeds are 4x faster than AC in dense deployments because of better efficiency and spectrum utilization. So
yes,
like maybe to borrow an analogy from the CPU world, that sounds like the type of thing where, like, clock speeds have remained relatively consistent in CPUs for ages, but instructions per clock have gone up dramatically. That sounds like a very similar thing, right? Of like, we have an established speed and we are just doing more with it per cycle. Is that basically what we're talking about?
That seems right. They're using more, I think, bits for the quadrature amplitude modulation.
Of course.
It's used in a lot of telecommunication stuff. And QAM.
Okay, I have seen that acronym before. I had no idea what it meant. Still have no idea what it means.
Basically, it means that they modulate the waveform of these analog signals to contain a digital signal, and it's more efficient and is less easily interfered with. It also, there's better power control.
So that's potentially going to cut down on the necessary error correction.
Yeah. So yeah, you'll have fewer drop packets because your neighbor's Wi-Fi is annoying. They also do orthogonal frequency division multiple access.
Of course they do.
Which it's a different kind of digital modulation scheme that just assigns subsets of the signal to individual users. And it seems like they may even be able to talk across routers. It's unclear how that works to me. And then the other point is the MIMO, the multiple input, multiple output. There's a multi-user MIMO thing now that I think has been around since in some AC deployments, but is required for the AX deployments. And what that means is that multiple users can use the same antennas at the same time, I believe. It's that one also is some of these, the Wi-Fi consortium. I feel like those people are probably writing these Wikipedia articles and the white papers that explain all this stuff. It's a little thin on exactly what that does. Oh, and then the other thing is WPA3 is coming, which is more efficient and more secure.
Oh, I don't think WPA2 has ever been 100% compromised, right? Like, I think there are some ways to access it or get into it in some, like, very specific scenarios, right? But it's never become anywhere near as hideously insecure as WEP, right?
It's not like WEP where now, like, an Android phone can break WEP, I believe. But yeah, it's. I mean, WPA2 is a good example of, like, secure enough for most users. WPA3, there's overhead with WPA2 depending on the type of encryption you use. It's not a problem on modern routers, but on old hardware. What was the old Linksys G router that everybody had?
Oh, the WRT54G.
Yeah, the WRT
classic.
Yeah, if you use the wrong type of encryption for that, it would chunk the thing because it didn't have hardware support for AES encryption, I think.
Oh, wow.
But that stuff's not a problem anymore. Also, the other thing about WPA3 is it requires, the password requirements are higher so that bad passwords won't, like, most of the people that I think have had WPA2 cracked are because of bad passwords. Like, if you make your password AAAAAAA, your WPA is going to be pretty easy to figure out.
Just use a random number of A's and you'll be fine.
There you go. Nailed it. It's a 1-bit password.
Let me see. I'm trying to think if I have any standout questions on this. So, on the one hand, you're saying the maximum throughput on this is 9.6 gigabits per second?
Yes.
On the other hand, you're saying that it really only makes sense in areas with a lot of existing interference. So where does that massive ceiling on throughput come in if this is not going to make much difference for people that don't already have a lot of overlapping network?
It's if you can use the wide 160 megahertz channels at the higher frequencies in your region.
Okay.
So it really depends on what part of the world you live in.
Oh, okay. So we're just getting into regulation at this point?
And how dense your deployment is. So like if you're only able to use 40 megahertz channels at your house now because your AC router is contested from everybody else around you, then you may be in a situation where an AX deployment makes sense.
Oh, I see. So it's not a matter of which parts of the spectrum are sanctioned in your area. It's just physically what
it's both.
Interference you have.
It's both. So like if you can tap into the above 5.4 gigahertz spectrum, that's great and will help you out, right? The main thing is the more efficiency in the routers with competition in the same space. It seems like to me, it's not like they're using a microwave band like the WiGig stuff is to get ridiculous bandwidth. They're just saying, hey, we can do these big fat channels. We can multiplex them.
Okay, so then that was another question I was going to ask. Is that sounds like that would not create any kind of line of sight requirements? Like this will more or less penetrate in the same way as AC.
The 6 gigahertz is about the same as 5. Like it's close enough to 5.4 that like it goes through walls in a house. If you have concrete walls, you're going to have problems, depending on how much rebar and stone is in there.
Any sense of, even if you're a good candidate for an AX upgrade in terms of like your, the interference patterns around you and stuff like that, any sense of whether that's a worthwhile thing to do until like most or all of your clients also support it?
So in the old days, I always like when you were jumping from G to N, getting an N router made a lot of sense because if you had one N device, then it would split down and drop everything else to G, but your N device would still run pretty fast. I don't know that it's worth upgrading immediately unless you have that really specific use case. Like you're in a dense, congested urban area with a lot of Wi-Fi, and you actually have uses for the high speed wireless.
But even without any devices that specifically support AX,
I think without devices that support AX, it's a different situation. I think if you had an iPad or you had a MacBook that supported AX, it would make a lot more sense.
I guess that brings me to my last major question of like, when is all this stuff happening?
So the hardware is shipping now. The thing that always happens with Wi-Fi is that the hardware starts coming out before the spec is totally locked down and finalized. Once they lock down the hardware.
Oh, good. That sounds great.
It's not great, but it's fine. You can buy a AX dual band 1500 AX router from Amazon today for $90.
Oh, that's okay. That's reasonable.
And if you want, that's an AX 1500. So that's across the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, whatever bands it's using. If you want the TP-Link AX 6000 8-stream smart Wi-Fi router, that's $300, $270.
Ah, man, like feature creep and price creep on consumer routers is a whole separate topic, I feel like.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like, I mean, the thing is, I feel like for most people, the AX stuff is like if you're outfitting your house with a mesh network right now, I think the Orbi one is available. They have a Wi-Fi 6 Orbi now with two nodes, and that's tri-band, so that's three ranges, three. It's AX 6000 up to 6 gigahertz, gigabits per second rather. I feel like I wouldn't spend $500 on AC stuff at this point. I would buy, if you're going to spend it, either wait or get the Wi-Fi 6 stuff, just so you have it in the future. Like this stuff lasts a long time.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, it sounds like if you're on an AC setup that you're even relatively happy with right now, it'd be better to just sit tight for a little bit, wait for device adoption to catch up. And
absolutely. I'm looking to see when I bought my router. I bought my Netgear AC router in 2014. So it's a 4-year-old AC 1900 router.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah.
This is one of the biggest reasons I've been happy moving to this modular approach where I've got the standalone router/gateway that is just that for wired stuff, and then having this external separate access point, because now I can throw this AC access point in the trash when whatever, sell it. Or put it in a drawer, most likely, when I'm done with it, and just get a new access point. And like this router is going to be good for a very long time, and I don't have to worry about replacing the entire thing.
And the router was what, like $100 probably?
It retails for $200. I got it at $150 on sale, but it's a very fast capable router that I've got. Like I set up my own VPN on it. It's doing a lot of stuff. I think I've talked about before. It's doing some DNS caching for me and stuff like that. Like it's a good piece of hardware, and like it's nice to configure that and have it just there and probably keep it for years and not worry about like a new Wi-Fi standard making that obsolete as well.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's you like the router with the access point built in, like as in all the mesh network stuff and all the standalone routers, is essentially like a TV with a VCR in the bottom, right? Remember those?
Yeah, totally.
So on one hand, on the other hand, the pro stuff is really hard to configure if you don't understand basic networking stuff.
It's a hassle. It's a massive hassle.
I've gone from being really wary of the mesh networking stuff to recommending it for everyone.
Oh, totally. I mean, it sounds like if you don't want to fiddle with stuff and you just want to plug things in and have it work.
And especially if you don't want to have to run wires. Like running wires is still the best way to make that stuff work and be super reliable. But not running wires is much better for almost every human being I've ever met.
I have a dark secret.
What's your dark secret?
The biggest reason that I wish I could own a home in this area is so I could run wires everywhere.
Brad.
And I mean everywhere.
Brad, when we bought this house 12 years ago, we had it for a week before we got the floors done. And Gina and I came over here. We painted the whole thing. And then I had half a day left, and I had bought 500 feet of Ethernet.
Oh my God.
And a bunch of outlets. And I have at least one Ethernet outlet in every room, and some rooms have 2 to 4. So they're everywhere.
I'm so jealous.
They're only Cat 5e though, because Cat 6 was really expensive back then. So it's more than good enough.
That'll be okay.
Yeah. I think that's unless you have other, so yeah, like the TLDR on should you get Wi-Fi 6 is if you already have AC and it's good for you, don't bother probably right now.
Yeah, just give it a few years.
If you're building a house or something and like doing Wi-Fi installation, if you're moving into a new place and you like, probably I would not spend money on, if you need to spend money on Wi-Fi stuff, I probably would not spend money on Wi-Fi on AC at this point. I would probably go with the full AX/Wi-Fi 6.
Yes, because I think you mean Wi-Fi 6 as opposed to Wi-Fi 5.
I hate this so much. Hey, did you know that Facebook is all caps now? It's FACEBOOK, all caps. They rebranded. We have to change the way we say it.
Nope. Nope. Real fast, last question. Like, do you have any idea when, like, let's say your iPhones, your flagship Android phones, your iPads, Surfaces, et cetera, will all start having 6 integrated? Like, that's probably, a little ways off in terms of getting it, like, efficiently integrated into SoCs?
So there's one thing that's important to note. Wi-Fi 6 micro... What are those NVMe? No, what are the little cards that go in the computers called? They're not NVMe, the other spec. I'll type PCIe card laptop and see if Google... Okay, so you can buy Wi-Fi 6 adapters for your laptop right now. They are M2 cards, little tiny M2 cards. They're like the size of a postage stamp. And they have antenna connectors on them. Like this, you can buy an Intel AX card right now. My guess is it's an upgrade option on a lot of laptops if you're doing build to order. So like you can get those devices now. They'll still be backwards compatible with AC and they'll work great with AC. So yeah, like everything but Macs where stuff is soldered on and phones. My guess is next year's phones support AC.
Okay. You mean 6 AX?
AX, yeah. And across the board, I'm sure there's some Android devices that support AX already.
Yeah, that would make sense. Those things come out all the time.
But in my experience, the cell phone processors are usually so slow that it doesn't matter. You're not going to see the maximum theoretical throughput of your Wi-Fi because the processor will choke.
Also, who needs multiple gigabits per second of throughput on a phone?
Look, man,
what are you going to do with that?
I got that 4K HDR video and it's uncompressed. So, yeah.
I got that speed test app. Just want to see that number go up.
Yeah, so that's Wi-Fi. If you all have questions about Wi-Fi, I don't think we're going to do questions this week because we did a big question episode last week. But you can send them to techpod@content.town. We will endeavor to answer them. Somebody asked me if I could come fix their computer last week.
Wow.
Which I thought was nice.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you agree?
I gave him a quote. My normal rate plus travel plus expenses. The usual.
Negotiations are ongoing.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Let's see. I guess that's it for us. You can mash the review button on iTunes. Helps a lot. We've gotten some. We should read some reviews at some point because there's some pretty funny reviews in there.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody loves a good review read.
Is my fragile ego going to be able to handle it?
Look. There has not been a more gratifying place for your fragile ego than the iTunes review section for this podcast.
Okay. I just want to be wrapped in a warm, comforting blanket.
It's universal adoration for you. Everybody hates me, but that's fine. I'm used to that.
You're going to be throwing roses at us.
Well, just you. Yeah, exactly. As long as you don't stand too close to me, you'll be fine. So mash the review button. That helps get the word out. The podcast is, I feel like this is our 9th episode now, or 10th episode, depending on how you count it.
Yeah. Trucking along.
So I'm enjoying it. It's been fun. The feedback has been really lovely, so we appreciate that.
Highly informative.
You can follow the podcast at Sweatpants Tech on the Twitters. I think we have an Instagram, but I don't expect to ever use that. I just reserved it just in case.
Good to know. I don't even have an Instagram, so maybe I'll just hijack that thing someday.
You don't have a gram?
Nope. Somebody had already gotten my name, so I was just like, what do I need this for?
That's I never do anything cool enough to take a picture of it. And I have plenty of venues for sharing pictures of my kid.
Yep, exactly.
So, Brad, where can people find you on the internets?
At Brad Shoemaker on Twitter, probably the best place.
I'm at Will Smith on the Twitters, also probably my best place. And thanks everybody for listening. I guess we'll see you all next week.
Yeah.
Bye.